Hello everyone, welcome back to the Mech Lab, where we try to be a better mech commander every day. Today we're going to be talking about building battle mechs and using certain budgets to optimize the C-build cost, battle value, and then these three here, heat, tonnage, and critical space, are all to do with the internals of the mech and how you want the mech to work. We've covered battle value pretty extensively in my battle value video, so let's talk a little bit more about critical space, heat, and tonnage today. And then we'll wrap up with a quick summary of C-builds and how to optimize that. So understanding how heat, critical space, and tonnage all link together is critical for understanding how to identify good mechs as well as how to make the best custom mechs. Critical space is really only important when you're making customs or when you're refitting existing mechs in a campaign. And it's the number of slots that a mech has in it. So I've loaded up an assault mech here, the Marauder 4K. It's a 100-tonner that makes really good use of pretty much all of its critical slots as well as its tonnage and its heat. But as you can see, it still has some critical space left. We're just going to quickly swap its structure into endosteel. But as you can see, endosteel doesn't have enough space to fit. So we're going to have to compromise and go with endocomposite instead. Now we're filling up more of our critical space. And we're also leaving ourselves with a little bit of extra tonnage. Now, personally, I like to have jump jets in the legs because it gives a little bit of extra crit padding to the legs, and then putting something really strong in the center torso like a primary weapon of some kind. Now, looking at this Marauder, you can see that it has quite a lot of heat sinks. It has 16 double heat sinks. Every mech with a fusion engine comes with 10 heat sinks. So this mech is paying an additional 6 tons for its extra heat that it has to dissipate. And if we look at its main armaments when they all fire, it produces 31 heat, and then if it's jumping, it's going to produce an extra 3 heat on top of that, so it'll get a little spicy once it starts jumping, but if it stands still, it'll actually start dissipating some heat every turn, assuming that it's not firing the small lasers. Now, heavy PPCs are really inefficient weapons in terms of how much they weigh and how much heat they produce. They weigh 10 tons, they produce 15 heat, they take up a massive 4 critical slots, so they're pretty hefty on all of their requirements to be taken. Gauss rifles, on the other hand, are a little bit heavier at 15 tons and take up a little bit more critical space with 7, plus they're going to need probably about 2 tons of ammo, so they're actually around 17 tons. But if you compare them to a heavy PPC, you need 7.5 tons worth of cooling just to keep this thing from overheating your mech. And that's if you have double heat sinks. Double heat sinks really let you up the efficiency of your weapons, because typically energy weapons aren't going to cost as much tonnage. They're just going to cost a lot of heat. So having a really good balance between the two is actually really important for making sure that you have the best customs. Now, for this Marauder, I think what we actually want to do is take some weapons that are really tonnage and fairly heat efficient and pair them up with the weapons that we already have. We're going to remove these heavy PPCs. They're costing us too much heat, and we're going to remove the ER small lasers as well. They're a good little backup weapon up close, but we want something with a little bit more punch. So I've swapped out our weapons, and you can see that we have a little bit of tonnage remaining, but our critical space is now full. But since we've removed so much of our need for heat, we can actually go in and just remove most of these extra heat sinks. And as you can see, you get a certain number of free engine heat sinks. These are the heat sinks that will fit inside of your engine. And the bigger your engine is, the more of these that you have. I'll up this to a 4-6 movement speed, and you can see suddenly we have 16 free engine slots. But it's really drastically impacted our tonnage. So we're going to bring it back down to a 353 here. And as I said, I like to have a really good weapon in the center torso. So we're going to take this ER large laser. I'm just going to slot it into that center torso right there. And then we're going to take our MML3s. We're going to pop them over here on this side of the mech. There's some ammo in there. And we'll put the ER large laser in this arm over here. Now, we're going to want some case in that torso to prevent the ammo from exploding. If the Gauss rifle gets hit, it will cause some damage to us, but it's not as devastating as getting hit with a full bin of like LRM ammo. Now, our overall damage is reduced, but we're a lot more efficient, and we've still got almost 10 tons to work with, and we can slot in another weapon there. So it turns out we do need a couple more heat sinks. So we can slot one in there, we can slot one in this arm over here. Now, we have 6.5 tons remaining. I think we can maybe shave off half a ton of armor, especially because that last half ton on standard armor only gets us 3 points. So we'll just take a couple points off the legs and one off of the center torso. Now, we don't have very much heat left to work with, and we're getting pretty limited on critical slots as well. One thing to note is that double heat sinks on the inner sphere side are really bulky. They take up a lot of space. So they'll fill up both your tonnage and your critical space really quickly, which is why you might want a bigger engine in your mech if you're going to have a lot of high heat weapons so that you can cool them without taking up a ton of critical space. Now, because we're so limited by our critical space, but not so much by our tonnage, I think maybe we will drop the endocomposite. So now we only have 4.5 tons remaining, but we have lots of critical space to work with. And I think that what we might do with that, we'll just get some nice backup weapons for in close to pair with the MML3s, which become really powerful SRMs. Although, if we wanted to simply up the number of LRMs that we're launching and reduce our critical space, we could instead take some LRM5s, which only consume 1 critical slot, but they do cost a little bit of extra tonnage. They cost 2 tons, whereas MML3s only cost 1.5 tons. They do produce the same amount of heat, so they're a pretty good even swap. If you have a little bit of extra tonnage and a little bit less critical space left over, you might want to do LRM5s instead. They do make a pretty effective long-range shotgun. They just aren't going to be very good in close. Get a nice medium laser in the head and abrasive medium lasers in the arm. I think I'll take this ER large laser, pop it over here, and we'll just have a really powerful close range complement that we can turn around and blast people behind us with. Producing 33 heat, I think maybe we'll just drop one of those medium lasers for a heat sink, and we'll just pop it in the arm there. So now we're producing 33 heat. If we fire all of the long range weapons, we're still a little bit under synced. So again, pretty easy. I think in this case, we'll probably just get rid of the ER small laser, and we'll get rid of another half ton of armor. We'll still be very heavily armored overall. And you know what? I think that this thing has maybe a little bit too much armor on the back, considering that it's mainly a long range mech that wants to sit back and blast people from afar. And now we have tonnage for an additional heatsink, and we'll slot it in right there. Oh, and one thing I forgot to mention, inner sphere double heatsinks cannot fit in the legs, whereas clan ones can. That is kind of a big deal. Although I do like having jump jets in the legs. It gives 2 things that can get crit instead of your hip or upper leg or whatever, because once you start getting leg crits, your mech kind of just falls down and you can't really get back up again. So as you can see, heat, tonnage, critical space, they're all intrinsically linked with one another, and building a battle mech and really optimizing it is a balancing act between the 3 of them. So that just leaves C-Bills. So C-Bills is pretty much only for narrative games or campaigns where you're using C-Bills as your currency to purchase your force and like run a mercenary company or run a military unit, these kinds of things. I'll be doing a more extensive video on C-Bills and how to use them in campaign in terms of like your time efficiency, because time is also a currency when you're doing a campaign, because repairs take time and travel time is a thing as well, and then you end up having to pay your employees for the months that you spend traveling to a planet, etc., etc. But I'll give a couple of really quick tips right now. The main thing that you don't want when you're balancing your budget around C-Bills is light and XL engines. A standard fusion engine will bring the cost of this Marauder to 10 million C-Bills. A light brings it to 18 million C-Bills. And then your XL engine brings it to a whopping 22 million C-Bills. Even standard fusion engines are actually very expensive. In terms of bang for buck that you can get, if you're looking for a scouting force, you can either buy one Locust, right? 1,500,000 C-Bills-ish, or you could have 5 Centipede scout cars. Okay, these things cost 310,000 each. They actually have more armor on all of their facings than any part of a Locust, meaning that they're able to take even a Gauss rifle shot to any facing and not be immediately crippled. They're both the same speed, meaning that they can both get very good target movement modifiers. Of course, Locusts can make use of forests, so they're a little bit more flexible that way. But Centipede scout car, you got your ability to skim over water, which is pretty pretty nice. And it's extremely obvious which has the higher overall damage output. 6 SRM2s versus a couple medium lasers and a couple small lasers. There's not even any comparison in terms of firepower. You have more than 10 times the firepower on the Centipede scout cars as compared to the Locust. Just a quick little comparison here. The Locust is, this many C-bills, and then the Centipede scout car is 1,554,000. So you're actually saving 20,000 C-bills, which is enough to get one reload for one of the Centipedes. So the thing that you have to keep in mind is this is going to chew through ammo pretty quickly. You're going to end up having to reload them pretty much every mission. So that gets pretty expensive over time. Here's another quick price comparison for you. An SRM4 costs $87,000, whereas your medium laser costs 40,000 C-bills. So building a force with lots of medium lasers, very, very cost efficient, but then you have to pay for either heat sinks if you're taking, say, an internal combustion engine Centipede scout car. You want to put medium lasers on here instead. You can only take like one medium laser because it's going to cost 1 ton plus 3 tons worth of heat sinks, which is not amazing. Fusion engines come with 10 heat sinks base, so you get to have a couple of free medium lasers, if you will, that will not cost you any additional tonnage. Just the 1 ton and the 3 heat will be covered by that fusion engine, which is why you'll see a lot of tanks that have like 3 medium lasers and then like some SRMs or something like that. It's because the fusion engine will only cover the base 10 on a vehicle. Now, just going back to our Marauder for 1 second, I wanted to talk about ammo efficiency. This Gauss rifle, in an average mission, you're gonna take about 12 to 15 turns most of the time. Sometimes missions are especially short and you only need maybe 8 or 10 shots. But when you're dealing with weapons that have ammo, you want to make sure that you have enough, but not too much. So an additional ton of ammo for the Gauss rifle is probably not necessary. I don't think most missions are going to take longer than 16 turns. But we have 4 MML3s and only 40 shots for the LRMs. Now, the reason why I think that this is completely fine is because the 10 volleys that we have are going to be supplemented by the SRM ammo. At some point, someone is probably going to get close enough to this mech that they'll be in like range 6 and we open up with the SRMs and the medium lasers instead of the long range complement of weapons. But if this thing just sits back the entire game and doesn't get close, it's going to run out of LRM ammo pretty quickly. So you might want to maybe take an MML off and slide in another medium laser or, another heat sink or what have you. But you also really want to make sure that you are preserving your mech as much as possible. Armor plates are really cheap to replace, but comparatively, mech parts are not. So if you get your arm blown off or your torso blown off, you take some major engine damage and your engine is completely destroyed, which, doesn't happen very often, but is possible. Like if you get the mech cored out, that's going to cost you a few million C-bills to replace whole engine or, if the entire mech gets cored. So you want to make sure that your customs are as well protected as possible. Having a little bit less armor than max is probably okay, but if you want to take a Wolverine and run it into the teeth of the enemy, it's definitely going to want to have that 184 out of 185 level of armor. And make sure that you're able to escape, because if you have a really expensive mech that costs 18 million C-bills and it gets surrounded by enemies and kicked to death, center torso gets cored out and you can't salvage it anymore, it's going to be a really big problem for your campaign. It's not easy to replace an assault mech. It's not even easy to replace a Locust. I mean, a million and a half C-bills is a hefty chunk of money. Thanks for watching the Mech Lab today. If you have any suggestions for any content that you would like to see, or any questions for me, or any comments on how you'd like me to improve my videos or anything like that, feel free to leave them down below. Please like, share, and subscribe. I really appreciate that. It helps the channel out immensely. Share the content with your friends and help them become better mech commanders as well. And have a great day, everyone.